Hold on one second. Everybody should see a pop-up now saying that it's going to be online. Hold on one second. All right, it's up there.
Okay, so welcome as we begin the recorded portion of this meeting. We just did a little light housekeeping. Okay, so for those of you who are not familiar with the raised hand feature, I know it's a little different depending on what device you're on, but if you go down to the chat, there should be a chat on your bottom bar, and there should be a little hand that you could wave. If you can't figure it out, maybe somebody could put it in the chat for you, or you could just turn on your mic for a second and jump in. So I'm going to keep letting people in. And again, I would figure out up top, maybe just converse about who's going to take some notes and who's going to work on the final report. And with that, we will begin with questions. Okay, David.
So I think we can all agree that we need to increase the reserves. I'm not sure there's anything else we can agree on, but I think we can actually agree on that. What is the target number here? I'd like to actually hear some numbers for what is the target for the reserves.
Do you mean eventually someday down the road?
Eventually someday, yes. No, I know the 400,000 each year to get past the state's irritation, but what is the actual target? How are we deciding that number? It's a big number, and it should be decided in some reasonably financially rational way. And so I think it would be good to hear what that number is, because I think there's a broad concern in the community that maybe the reserves will have been a little too low relative to other school districts, and let's fix it. Okay. Now, understanding that that's a long-term problem.
Sure. I mean, I would say at a minimum, we should have 10% of our budget in various reserves. That's combined. Now, keep in mind there's reserves, which is it's all under the umbrella of the term fund balance. Reserves means reserved for a specific purpose, such as a reserve for retirement contributions, reserve for workers' compensation, those kind of things. And then there's unreserved, which is more of the just pure rainy day fund. That number, it's also known, it's really called unassigned, is limited to 4% of our budget. I would like for that to be 4%. And I mean, ultimately, it would be nice. I think it would be a good goal to set, to have that at the 4%. And the other reserves, the various reserves, as I mentioned, reserved for retirement system contributions, reserved for, there's one that's called employee benefit accrued liability reserve. There's one for unemployment because we're self-insured for unemployment, reserve for workers' compensation, where we're self-insured for workers' compensation. Somewhere around 10% of our budget, I think would be a good goal to have. It'll take a number of years to get there, but I think that would be a good goal. Along with reserves, it would be great to set up a capital reserve as well, separate from the others. A capital reserve is money that's set aside for future building projects. It's held there for those type of projects. It needs voter approval for the money to go into the fund, the reserve fund. And at some point down the road, if we were to say, and I'm just going to make up a number, let's say we had $20 or $30 million in a capital reserve fund, and we needed to do whatever, a roof on a building that's going to cost $1 million. We could say the voters have to approve money coming out of the reserve fund, and have to approve the project itself anyway. But we could say, for instance, okay, along with the budget vote, there's going to be a separate proposition to take $1 million from the capital reserve do the roof at whatever school, and that's a separate proposition. That way, we can do the work, we get the building aid on it, because it's community approval, we do all the, the normal process for doing a project like that. And it doesn't add anything to that year's tax levy. That would be nice to have too, a capital reserve down the road. So that would be, I think those are reasonable long-term goals with.
Okay, so I was writing as fast as I could, but I didn't really get it all down. Would it be possible just to provide a list of current reserves, where you think we should be, a rationale for why that is, if there's a good one, and let's include that in the mix going forward here.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Again, just a reminder, if you're not speaking, please mute yourself. Hua, you'll be next.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I just want to ask, in this budget, how many of the new hires that we're gonna have already included in this budget? Just a number and a brief, illustrations, say which are the areas that we're gonna have them.
So for full-time teaching staff, right now, we're looking at only hiring an ENL teacher. We do have to replace a social worker, and we do have to replace some other positions in here. So we could certainly drop the total of that. There's also, in some occasions in a district of this size, especially when you have younger staff members, we have a number of people that will go out on leave due to good things like pregnancies and things of that nature. So we're going to have to hire those. Some we know of right now, some we get surprised with over the summer. And by the way, so do they. They get surprised with good news like that over the summer, that things happen. So we can't really predict necessarily when that may happen. But the ones that we are aware of are already in the process of hiring. There are also a number of positions that we've accessed the positions. So as we said, we're looking at 30 positions overall in the district that we're getting rid of. Some positions with the accessing, a couple of individuals in some departments, we're not asking back. So there's a perception that everyone we hire gets tenure, and that is a fallacy. We do not give tenure to every single person we hire as a teacher or an administrator in our district. So we cannot tell you who those are. There's reasons for those people not having that, and their decision sometimes may be before we not hire them, they may decide to resign. So on their own accord. And the reasons for some folks not getting hired back can vary, whether it's administrative teacher or any other position in the district. It could be for their performance. It could be a number of different factors, but our evaluation system with all of our employees is part of that process. So as I said, we're looking at 30 positions cut so far, an ENL position, a social work position. Depending on how our accessing goes, we were anticipating possibly hiring a special education position that we needed. However, if the accessing goes the way we think it may go, there may be some teachers returning back to different positions and may not require us to do that.
So it might be like 3 FTE. That
Maybe 2 or 3, yeah.
2 or 3.
But as I said, I can't put a prediction on the leaves at this point, how many leaves you may have.
Okay. My second question is about the SAC, non-instruction salary, and this seems like we have $124,000 there. Is this covered by the program itself, revenue itself?
Say which code again?
Non-instructional salaries.
It's in the SAC program. I'm wondering because dollar change is like 124,000.
Was that? I'm sorry, the connection is bad. Did you say SAC, the SAC program?
Oh, yeah, SACC.
Oh, yeah,
that's it.
Construction.
Yep.
Yeah, line item is 7,140, 1,600, 1491. Yeah, because I know parents pay for that program, right? We pay.
Yeah.
for
Oh, yes. That's yeah. So for the SAC
just
program.
wondering.
Oh, yes. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. The increase is because the participation in SAC dropped because of COVID. So then it's been coming back up. So the increase in the salary is to address the increase, the number of kids that we have. But on the revenue side, we're also increasing the anticipated revenue accordingly. So we always try to make it where the SAC revenue at least covers the cost of SAC.
So this is the revenue part of increase, but you said the students has dropped, right? The number of the students who enter
No.
this program.
It dropped during COVID.
It
has
dropped during
increased.
COVID.
Dropped in COVID, then it come back.
Yeah,
So the
it's
students
coming
are
back,
more.
yeah. But as we said before, we're increasing fees across the board. Any fees that we charge to community members, we have not increased in a number of years. So we need to do that just to keep up with the inflationary costs associated with some of these positions as well.
So what you're saying is that the revenue part, the expenses we pay to the SAC program is not, cannot cover the expense that used for the salary and other parts to run this program. Is that the reason that?
No,
you have this budget
the
increase?
revenue brought in from SAC payments covers the cost of the program for the most part. And generally, it is above that. But again, we haven't increased the fee structure, so as salaries for that unit have gone up, we need to, and also the number of students coming back to the program increases, we need to increase the fees in order to continue to cover the costs.
And also the general philosophy of the school district for as long as the SAC program has been in place, which is long before I started working here, was not to be a money-making enterprise, but to cover its costs. Not to, well, if it's going to cost us $1 million, let's charge $2.5 million, and we have another $1.5 million. The philosophy has always been just cover costs, keep it as inexpensive as possible while still covering costs.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And again, just housekeeping for those who are just popping in. Please keep yourself muted unless you're asking a question. If you want to ask a question, raise your hand. And once you've asked your question, if you could please lower your hand, just so I know you're not queued up with another question. So now we'll go to Ian, please.
Yes, I have a couple questions. Again, looking through the budgetary numbers, like I mentioned last week, one way I was looking at it was looking at line items that are increasing by more than 10% and have an increase of more than $100,000. Of course, all these line items add up, but looking at that, we did address a few of them last week, but I just wanted to run through just to make sure we have a thorough understanding. So like the legal expenses going up a big chunk, 25%. Is that in proportion to the number of cases against the district?
The single biggest reason for that is the Child Victims Act cases, of which there are 3. As I mentioned, 2 go back to the 1960s, 1 goes back to the early 1980s. And the legal fees are tremendous on those cases. There are years when we have more legal issues than others that ebbs and flows, year to year sometimes. But this year to next year, single biggest reason is those Child Victims Act cases.
Got it. And then, so another item, heating, oil, and gas, right, going up 17.24%, right? We all understand, right, the cost of these things, right, can be volatile, to say the least. So my actual question, though, regarding that, does the district negotiate a contract on a yearly basis? Is there flexibility in negotiating shorter term, longer term, that kind of thing, to try to get to catch a contract at an advantageous time, so to speak?
We purchase off of the various contracts, either sometimes state contracts, sometimes Suffolk County contracts or BOCES contracts. So we'll look at various ones and see which are the most advantageous at the time. And there are times when we think maybe we could do better on our own, just on our own bid. So it's not that, well, we always buy off of this contract or that contract. It can vary year to year. And we try to see what the same item might be a different price through a Suffolk County contract as it is through an Eastern Suffolk BOCES contract. One might be higher than the other. And
Sure.
we'll look at both of those kind of things, for example.
And then is there flexibility in the term length as well, right? Because like if prices are high, right, it'd be advantageous, of course, to negotiate a shorter term. If you think it's at a low point, then maybe we could lock in a longer term, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, we would not be able to go out more than a year. Yeah. I don't think we could go out for more than a year. On that type of contract. I mean, I suppose it's possible that we could enter into a long-term contract, but I'm not
Right, there's
sure if
risks. Yeah, there's risks either way. And I guess part of the question is, is there a legal reason that we couldn't, or is it the resellers, selling the fuel wouldn't allow it?
I'm not sure. Let me look into that one a little
Okay.
bit.
Yep, fair question. And then the only other thing regarding the budget, right? There's a number of line items, that fall under this category of more than 10%, more than $100,000 increase, related to salary. I think it would be great to see a breakdown. And I think some of this, kind of overlaps with what Hua was saying or asking, maybe a breakdown of the, for a particular category, we're adding this many amount of positions and existing employees are getting an average raise of this much, right? That kind of thing.
Sure, I'm working on something for that. Yeah, that I think
Okay.
will find useful. Yeah.
Okay. And if I may, actually, one other thing that actually came up at last week's Board of Ed meeting, somebody from the district got up and spoke, a senior member asking regarding raising the star relief, right, for seniors to a different income bracket, I believe it was.
Yeah.
I think it would make sense, and I think we would at least owe it to her and other senior members of the community to, run, some type of report to see what that looks like, right? Because obviously that would have some type of impact, effect on the budget. I think we should at least see what that looks like. And then, if it could be accommodated, right? If it's negligible, great, because something might be negligible to the district, but makes a big difference to senior members of the community. But no guarantee. And obviously that would be for future budgets, not this coming, this budget season that we're in right now.
Sure. So I'll just address that. It might might change your viewpoint on that a little bit.
Well, my viewpoint was just to look into it. I'm not saying that we should do it or not.
You'll see where I'm
Okay.
going with it in a second. And I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but you'll see where I'm going with that. So she said star, but what she meant was there's an exemption now for senior citizens or people with disabilities who make below certain income levels. So for instance, and it's a sliding scale. So right now, the highest amount of exemption can be 50%, right? And that's for somebody making senior citizen or person with disabilities, and you have to qualify for whatever level of disability, and make below these dollar amounts. So for the 50% exemption, you have to make below $29,000 a year. And then that increase by each approximately $1,000 of income above that, that 50% goes to 45% and 40%, 35%, and so on. And the upper limit is around $29,000, and that's a 5% exemption. You make above that, no exemption. What the state did, New York State did this year, was say to school districts and municipalities around the state, the state sets those upper levels. So this year, the state said you can raise those now. We haven't been allowed to until now. You can raise those income levels. So instead of starting at 29,000 or 28,000, one or the other, I forget, for the 50% exemption, that can be 50,000, right? So 50,000, you would get that 50% exemption. And then again, it would be indexed with a sliding scale. So, and it's approximately $1,000 each level. So 50,000, below 50,000, you'd get the 50% exemption. Between 50,000 and 51,000 is a 45%, 51 and 52,000 is a 40%, and so on, where it would up to 58,000 would be the 5%, and then above 58,000, no more exemption. That's what she's asking for us to adopt, those increased levels that the state is now allowing. This is the part I was talking about, when it sometimes changes people's opinion on these. It makes no difference to the school district. It doesn't affect us financially at all. What it does is it lowers the assessed value, just like any other exemption. So if I get an exemption for my property, right, my taxes go down, yours go up. So that's the way this exemption, like every other exemption, works. If that were something that were adopted by the board, and that these exemptions every year are approved by our board at the reorganization meeting in July. And I'm trying to get information from the town now to get a fairly decent estimate as to what this would be, how much of exempt assessed value would be exempt compared to what it is now. And therefore, what would be the increase to everybody else. So it's similar to, like, if somebody agrees their taxes, their assessment goes down. All that means is the tax rate goes up a little bit and everybody else pays a little more. Same kind of thing.
Yeah, no, and that makes a lot of sense. And that's why I'm not advocating for it to be implemented or not be implemented. I was just saying, let's run the numbers, see what that
Yeah.
looks like.
Yeah.
And I think
Okay.
that's only fair. Thank you.
Yep.
All right, thank you. Again, I know people keep coming in, so just keep yourself muted if you can. If it's not going to get you in trouble at work, if you can turn your camera on. Otherwise, you're just not appearing as being present at the YouTube feed. Okay, thank you. I think Shari is next, please. Shari, did we lose you? Okay, we'll come back to you. Carlos? Oh, Shari's back. Sorry. Shari?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay,
We-
sorry. So I apologize. I have a couple of questions, but one of them is, I see on the budget, the line items, there's something that says ERS for $500,000, and I have no idea what that is. So I might have missed it being talked about, but I don't know what that is. So Jeff, could you tell us what that is?
That is the employees' retirement system. If you remember
Oh,
back
okay.
to, I think it was a couple of meetings ago, when I went over the pension system. We have two: it's employees' retirement system and teachers' retirement system. And one's going up a little bit, one's going down a little bit. So those rates are established by those retirement systems. They're a percentage of salaries that we have to pay them.
Okay, and then the other question is, I happen to notice, I know there's a lot of increases that talk about salaries. So I'm assuming, and I'd like you just to clarify it, that most of those are contractual increases, not hiring increases. It's just completely contractual, that's where, like, for example, there's guidance. And I know Kevin said that you're not hiring somebody for guidance. So I'm assuming that increase is all just because contractual increases.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things that go on with, with all these hundreds of budget codes. So like now, we have this for next year. As we get into next year, for example, it might turn out that, well, this person moved here or that one moved there. And sometimes it's like, well, I'm not sure yet where all of the, like now, for instance, for next year. So I have the 30 positions that we're accessing are incorporated into this line item budget. We don't even know yet exactly who those people are going to be and where they're going to be. So what that's going to mean, now my thing is when I'm doing the budget, I want to make sure there's money in the budget for everybody first. Then if it's, well, when we first did the budget, it turns out, well, a reduction was made somewhere else. So somebody might have shifted around, that kind of thing. I might have taken the reduction from here, but as it turns out, we made the reduction somewhere else. So now in the following year's budget, it may look like, wow, why is so much getting added to that? Because it might have been one of the budget lines we reduced last year, not knowing where the cuts were coming from. So that's one of the problems with working on a budget now. So a year from now, and we're looking at this budget, it's because this is my best guess now as to where those cuts are going to be. It may turn out to be something different. I know there's money in the budget for everybody, but it might be somewhere else and we have to move it from one place to another. But in what you're looking at, one budget to the next, it's what our original budget was for the year, not necessarily where we're at right now. Because if we make a budget transfer, and it could be that somebody moved, it could be various reasons. In fact, for some of those like guidance, we have some positions in our budget now that used to be paid for by a grant. That only that was after even this budget was our current year's budget was approved last year. We found out some of our grant money was being reduced, and they would have to be incorporated into our budget, or we cut the positions. So we incorporate them into the budget, and that was some of the guidance and social workers and psychologists. So that kind of thing can happen too. They're not additional people that we have. It's just they used to be paid for. In this case, there were some that used to be paid for by a grant. So one of the things I mentioned before, I'm working on a report that will show a lot of that I'll have out to you in the next day or two on a lot of those salary codes. Why did this one go up that much, and why did that one go up that much? And sometimes, what catches people's eye is the one that went up a lot. If a lot of times there's a corresponding decrease somewhere else. But that's what catches everyone's eye is the increase. So I'm going to put that together and I'll send that out to everybody. So hopefully when you see that, that'll be useful and you'll understand that kind of stuff better.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. All right, we'll go Carlos and then David.
Hey guys, I have a couple questions on here that I'm gonna try to fire through, but can we just talk about the transportation contract and just how the economics works around that, and how much flexibility do we have in terms of, hey, year over year, is it that they dictate to us, this is what the increase is, there's no opportunity for us to go out to bid for a different company, or are we allotted a certain vendor for transportation services? Just trying to get my head around that.
Sure. So it's not up to the transportation company to dictate to us what the increase will be. It's if we're doing an extension of an existing contract, then the amount that it can be increased is actually established by the state education department, and it has to do with CPI. Unfortunately, this past year, because inflation has gone up so much, CPI is so high. That's why our transportation costs are going up so much now, because it's tied to inflation. But the rate it's not just the transportation company saying, hey, we decided to raise our rates next year. It's the only way we can extend an existing transportation contract is at or below, of course, if they agree to below, whatever that year's CPI is, again, established by the state education department. We cannot go above that. If the transportation companies were to say, let's say the state were to say, the most you can increase transportation contract next year is 3%. Both sides have to agree to it. Now, we might say, nah, we think we could do better by going out for, it's not actually a bid for transportation, it's called a request for proposals. But we could do that, or the bus company itself might say, you know what, 3%, we're losing money on this contract. We're not willing to extend it at that percentage increase. So if either of those happens, then we go out and do a request for proposals or an RFP. Or we could choose that. It could be up to us to do. Here's the problem with doing an RFP, and this happens all the time. It might seem logically that, well, why not do an RFP? Maybe we'll get a better price. Here's the problem. If we do an RFP, right now, we're saying we're not extending the contract. We're doing a new request for proposals. We put it out. And our existing, whether we get more bus companies to respond or not, whatever, it doesn't matter. Our existing bus company, which is Suffolk Transportation, can put in a proposal and maybe they increase their prices by 10% in that proposal. If they win the proposal, they win it. We can't just say, oh, never mind, we'll just go out at the CPI. Too late now. Now we're stuck to that 10%. So that's why it can be, that can really backfire to say, well, let's just go out and do a new RFP. I mean, if we really think we're could do better, or we're unhappy with our current company, or they're unwilling to extend the contract at CPI, that's a different story. But just to, maybe we can get a better price, that can really backfire. And so what happened when COVID hit in March of 2020, we used to use two different bus companies. We had Suffolk Transportation for our big buses and Acme or Bauman, the same company, for minibuses. Acme, that was, if you remember, it was a Friday, March 13th, 2020. Over that week, that was our last day of school. Over the weekend, the governor said, that's it, all schools are closed next week. By the end of that week, the Acme Bus Company had already sent out letters to all its employees telling them they were laid off. And we said, well, we're certainly not going to pay you. We don't know if schools are going to open in another week or two. We have no idea. We're not going to pay you. So anyway, make a long story short on that, they went out of business. Acme Bauman went out of business. They said, forget it, we're closed, close up shop, they're done. So for the new year now, for the, for the 2020-21 year, we didn't have a bus company to do our minibuses. So that summer we had to do a request for proposals for our minibus service. And the bus company, and it's not just, well, here's who we pick. There's a whole matrix for scoring proposals. And it's not just, it wasn't just me or the board saying, well, we like that company, so let's go with them. There's a process to follow. And in that case, Suffolk Transportation won that contract. And so they got our minibus service. Now, we were happy about that because they're an excellent company and they've done a great job with our big buses. So as far as that part of it's concerned, that was okay. The problem is that now, because of what we had been paying to the new company with the new contract, we're paying that year alone, it went up $600,000 just for the minibuses. Nothing we could do about it. Keep in mind, at that, what just happened too was there's not that many bus companies on Long Island that do schools. And one of the major bus companies that service Long Island schools just went out of business. So you had less competition for the same amount of work, which generally speaking will drive up prices. And it's not so easy for a bus company to bid on a school district where they don't have a bus yard anywhere near. So a company that's based out in whatever, I don't know, Eastern Long Island somewhere, or out in Western Nassau County, there's no way they can bid on our buses. They have to have yard within, such and such a distance and all of that kind of stuff. They have to have a lot of infrastructure nearby to be able to perform that contract. So anyway, so the increase in the transportation cost is the extension of the contract. The percentage increase is governed by the state education department. Can't be more than that. And going out to do an RFP, that can really backfire.
I mean, that makes sense. And these, so we're saying there's limited amount of players that service transportation in all districts in Long Island. What's the possibility that this one company could service not just Three Village, maybe Port Jeff? They also have contracts there. Like, are these companies working on multiple districts because there's just so few vendors? I guess where I'm trying to get at is,
Yep.
And I just don't know this side of the school business, but has there ever been just historically thoughts about a couple districts coming together and kind of creating some sort of cooperative to keep transportation costs low with, these approved vendors that the state says that we can have contracts with.
Yeah,
I was
well,
just trying to think, I was thinking through that last night. Yep.
yeah, so what we do for our, so like for our in-district transportation, it's for our in-district schools. I don't think there would be any way we could do like a joint contract with, let's say, the Comstock School District. They're much smaller than us. But what we do is for some of our private schools or non-public schools that we transport to, which can be further away, we have to transport, if you remember, I think I covered, up to 15 miles away for non-public schools. And so for some of those, like we might have one child going to whatever, so-and-so school in Ronkonkoma, or we might have one student going there. Well, Middle Country might have one going there, Smithtown might have two. So we'll go in on a bus, that kind of thing. It's called piggybacking on the contract. That kind of thing we'll do to share the cost for that. But for in-district buses, it's each district has its own contract. Now, some districts have their own transportation, which that's another discussion. There's certainly pros and cons to having our own transportation department. I've done both. I've had worked in district where we had our own buses and here where we contracted out. And I can tell you, not just from administrative ease, I don't mean that makes my job easier. That's not where I'm going with it. I think it's a much better setup to contract it out. I think in the long term, it actually saves money because we don't have the legacy costs that would be, another 100 to 150 employees that we might have legacy costs, meaning like health insurance and retirement and that kind of thing. They're outside vendors. We have no, we pay them on a year-to-year basis, and that's it. We have no, once they retire, our employees, if they retire and they have health insurance, we have to pay a portion of their health insurance throughout their life. And also, as most, if not all of you know, it's not so easy for us to get rid of an employee who is maybe not performing up to our standards. Not just, everyone hears, well, teachers and tenure. Well, that's part of it, but all civil service employees have civil service protection as well. It's not so easy to just say, you know what, you're fired. There's a process, and sometimes, so I'll say it this way, it's really, really difficult, if not impossible, to get rid of a mediocre employee, right? You have to attain a certain level of badness in order for us to get rid of somebody, even with civil, not just tenure, but civil service protection. That's something we do not have to worry about with our bus company. We can, for whatever reason we want, call a bus company and say, you know what, we don't want this driver driving for us anymore, period. And it could be a lot of things. It could be, we've had where somebody has sent me a video of one of our buses driving through a red light. Here it is. Here's the video. And we've called the bus company, said that driver never drive for our district again. Out, done. So there are certainly some advantages to contracting out the way we do.
No, it's interesting. I think maybe not for this year, but maybe for next year, it'll be interesting to do some sort of case study to see in a long term, like the cost, if it's, because there's capital costs that we can probably funnel through kind of the capital budget to acquire the vehicles. But it maybe for next year, it'll be something that we can kind of explore. I just have a few questions, and I don't want to hog up all this time, but I noticed a couple of things on the budget. Inter-fund transfers. I think we have about a $1.7 million inter-fund transfer. I just didn't know what that represented.
Did you say the 1.4 million? That's what you said?
It's
you said the 1.4 million?
think total is 1.6.
Oh, 1.7, okay, well, there's, okay, so 4201 schools, those are special schools. Dr. Mason, or actually Donna Pesapane, either one of you, could you explain, what a 4201 school is? I don't know if you're speaking, Dawn, but we can't hear you. So,
And just to be clear, it's called transfers to capital funds.
oh, that one,
That's the name of it,
there's
yeah.
a couple of others. There's also,
Yeah.
where I was going with that. There's also, what's called transfer to ESY, that's the extended school year. That's our special education, summer program, which is funded mostly, through our special aid fund, where we get grant money for it. But the, district does have to pick up a piece of that. The transfer to capital fund, that's the capital projects, we were talking about, the, cupola repair at Murphy, 2 sets of bathrooms at Jelena's, another $100,000 in playground equipment to go with our new that we're putting in the summer at Arrowhead Elementary School, the playground specifically with the handicap accessible type equipment. We'd like to add another $100,000 worth of equipment on that. That's what that transfer to capital is. Those capital projects, and that money is out, that money cannot be used for anything else. It's outside the cap. So to say, well, cut that down to 0, now we have another $1.4 million. No, we don't. So that's what I was talking about last night. That money, if it's in there, it can only be used for that. Doesn't take the place of anything else. And that's what we get the 66 building aid on.
Right, that's where I was gonna get at. So the 1.4, we'll get some sort of subsidy for 66% of that. So we're not spending 1.4. We'll get 66% of that return over time. I think you were explaining that yesterday.
Correct. Yes. Dawn, did you, or Donna, did you have information on the 40? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we weren't sure if you heard us or not.
Oh, no.
We did.
All right, a 4201 school could be like Henry Viscardi or the Cleary School. Those students have special needs and we have to pay them up front, even though we get federal funding for it back. So we have to have the money available in order to pay the tuition monthly. And then through the stack system, we get the money back for that.
Got it.
Okay.
Thank
you.
Okay. And there's separation pay for about 1.4 million. Just trying to get insight on that. And then the very last question, just so I don't want to hog up any more time. So I know we talked yesterday about medical insurance increasing. What I'm struggling with is, like, I know industry-wide healthcare costs are increasing. I'm just trying to wrap my head around, if you just look at salaries, right? Like, salaries doesn't increase at the same ratio as the health insurance is increasing. And I'm just trying to understand why that would be the case. If headcount is relatively, it's not increasing in the same proportion. I just don't understand why medical expenses or premiums would be that much higher. I think we're increasing about $5 million. Those are the last 2 questions.
Okay, the separation pay, that's our well, it's that includes our teacher retirement incentive, gets paid out of that, as well as when somebody retires, if they have unused vacation time. Also, teachers can get paid for a number of unused sick days when they retire. And you saw the article that was in the news the other day with, you saw these, police bosses retiring with, $400,000 or $500,000 in unused days. Our teachers, the maximum amount a teacher can get in unused sick days is $30,000 when they retire. And that's if they have at least 300 accumulated sick days over the, which is roughly about 20 years worth of sick time. If they have that unused accumulated days, that's the most a teacher can get is 30,000. But that's all in that. are 12-month people who get vacation days. If they have unused vacation when they retire, they get paid for, and that's capped too. It varies by unit as to how many days they can get paid for. But that all comes out of that code. As far as the health insurance, the percent, well, we pay a portion of all our employees that get health insurance. The district pays, all our employees pay a portion of it. It used to be, if you remember, I was talking about one of our other meetings, back into it was somewhere around the mid to late 90s, our employees didn't pay in at all. Because health insurance just wasn't that big a deal back then. It didn't cost a tremendous amount. Healthcare in general just didn't cost what it costs now. So starting somewhere in the late 90s, 96, 97, somewhere on there, we started requiring our employees to pay in a percentage of towards health insurance. And in each succeeding employee contract, that number goes up a little bit each time. And then also, when somebody retires from here, if they have health insurance when they retire, they're entitled to health insurance in retirement. And they pay the same rate that they paid when they retired. So over the years, as that number has gone up, the portion that the employees pay, also for them as retirees, they're paying more into that. And the amount of the increase is based on what the increase in premiums is. We don't have necessarily more people. We're not increasing benefits or that kind of thing. We're part of a self-insured health insurance consortium with two other districts, Smithtown and South Country. And our premiums now, and very similar benefits to the Empire plan or NYSHIP, New York State Health Insurance Plan. Those terms kind of used interchangeably, Empire and NYSHIP. Very similar in benefits, but our costs are much less. In fact, our cost for, I think I said last night, our premium for family coverage right now is 32% less than what Empire's is. So it's saving us a tremendous amount of money being part of this self-insured consortium, which is administered by United Healthcare, which is the same company that administers it, NYSHIP, but we don't have the administrative costs that NYSHIP does.
That makes sense. Sorry. So we're self-insured. It's not a premium-based plan.
We're part of a self-insured consortium. We're not exactly self-insured. The district pays premiums to the health plan. The health plan is self-insured as part of a consortium with two other districts. So.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, let's go, David.
Okay, so school districts across the island are struggling to attract students. Our district's currently on track to lose about half our students. Ultimately, that roughly translates into half as many teaching jobs. At what point does it start to make sense to start reducing costs to become more competitive for families and students and to create jobs? And this ties into my repeated request here that we start to think of a long-term plan here, financial plan for the district. You got any thoughts on that?
So if you remember from last night and from some previous meetings, I did describe how the reduction of part of the 30 teachers we were talking about was due to enrollment decreasing. So if enrollment continues to decline, unfortunately, we may have to continue to do that. Now, the only thing that would offset some of that is if the community in and of itself looks at some of the programs that we discussed at some of those strategic planning meetings, like a FLES program, for instance, foreign language in the elementary school program, where you would have to hire or transfer over teachers and then replace the teachers we're transferring over with teachers to replace those teachers, unless attrition balances it out for those type of programs. So that type of thinking as we're going through, just like the years ago when we had declining enrollment, we added a number of programs. Remember back when we added STEM to the schools. And sadly, when COVID came along, all the STEM teachers were put back in either classroom settings or became the instructional technology coaches that we have. So those are the considerations. So the long-term plan is we will keep analyzing the staffing, which is based upon, staffing is based upon the enrollment of in courses and the enrollment in the schools, the elementary schools in particular. Enrollment in elementary schools, by the contractual averages we have to go by, we were extraordinarily low, and we've been slowly increasing those. They're not going up to exactly where they would be immediately, because that would be a shock to the entire system as we're moving forward. And we also have, because we're divided over 5 elementary schools, some bad breaks where we would have a smaller class in one building where the number of staff there, their class size may be in the low 20s, but the comparable class in another school may be higher. But overall, they're still under the contractual average by the grade level in the district. It's just by the nature of having so many schools, and not that we have a lot of schools, but we have a number of schools. If we had less schools, those numbers would be better. So that is going to be part of a continual process. 11 years ago, when we heard that class sizes were too large, and we were hearing that in comparison to some districts like Port Jeff. Well, Port Jeff in general has classes that are small because it's a smaller district. So it's an unfair comparison to do that. But when we look at where we would like to be, we have contractual obligations with that. Same is true in the secondary, what the contractual averages have to be for teachers across the subject area within the district, not just in a building or a particular department in a building. But at the same time, we also don't want classes extraordinarily large. For instance, as we've said, some of the rumors on Facebook of class sizes going up to 35. Well, they really can't. We can't have class sizes that large in areas because of our contractual obligations. And also at the same time, from an instructional standpoint, you don't want them that large. So that sort of makes sense too, that you don't want them too big as well. But as we move forward, if enrollment continues to decline, sadly, we will have to also decrease the amount of the teaching staff we have. Now, with the potential, if the board supports the option B, that was seemingly the supported option from the community and from the parents and from the staff in the district for restructuring. If we go to that option, the 6th grade moving alone will see a reduction in the number of teachers, because you're going from 5 buildings having 6th grade to only 2 having that. So the number of teachers needed will go down. We indicated that earlier. We estimated that when that occurs, if it occurred 24-25, anywhere from 4 to 5 teachers could be reduced. Subsequently, though, if the 9th grade goes to the high school, one particular area, we actually obviously have to have teachers to teach those subject areas. Now, certainly some of the teachers that are at the junior high school levels shift to the high school to teach those things, but we would probably need more guidance counselors at the high school because an entire grade level is being added there. And the caseloads of the counselors are, I think, a little above where we'd like them to be. And I'm saying that as a relative to us, not relative to a teacher that teaches in another district where their caseload may be much higher, where we believe they should be. So there will probably have to be an increase in number of guidance counselors. So that we're talking about maybe 2 to 3 people in that area. So as we do these type of things, there's definitely going to be shifts in that. So this is a long-term piece. It's going to be based upon our population. If population starts to increase, we can either handle that increase based on our current population, current number of staff, and class sizes make it a little larger. Or if population decreases, enrollment decreases, we may have to reduce accordingly. So that is at the whim of how many students are going to wind up coming to us or be with us for the next few years. So just to be clear, though, the population based upon the study that we did over the 10-year period has roughly gone down anywhere from 2 to 3% on average, depending on the year. So we were about 7,400 students in 2012. We're at 5,500 right now. During COVID, we went up a little bit because we were one of only 3 districts on the island that had everyone in full time. But we anticipated that we would continue for this year, but that did not occur. The enrollment went down for this year. So we're back to going down again. So we had a momentary blip of an increase, and now we're on a decrease right now. Now, to give you a sense, though, kindergarten numbers are hard to predict. It's not every student that registered for kindergarten district. First of all, kindergarten is not a mandate in the state. Sounds kind of ridiculous, but it's not required under state regulation. So some parents choose not to send their students to kindergarten. Some students that are registered for kindergarten may choose to go to some of the private schools in the area, whether it be Harbor Country Day or Ivy League or St. Patrick's or some of the other schools in the area, wherever it might be. Not every student that is registered with us is coming to us. That happens every year. So right now, a number for kindergarten on paper says about 370. This current year's number is about 320. However, we were around that same number last year with potential registrants, and we rounded with only 320. Again, for all the reasons I just described. So that is a hard thing to predict, and we're always watching that. What is also difficult is as we're going through the process of kindergarten registration, we test the kindergartners. And some of those kindergartners might wind up being assigned for special education programs, and whether it's Etocket or Arrowhead or some of the other schools that have some special programs, or ENL where they might go to Mount. So it all depends where they fall after their testing. And that's an ongoing process. We literally still have students coming to us all the way through the fall trimester at the elementary level. And then if we have a long break in December, sometimes we get families that move in then. But one of the things we have to be careful with is, while we keep looking at, how many people are moving in, we also have to be cognizant that the registrar keeps track of how many people are moving out at the same time. So sometimes families will move out at the same time. So overall, our number is down. We do have it. It's not as if no one is moving to Tulare Village and we don't have any new students. We certainly have new students in every grade level and every building across the district, but overall, the number is down.
So just following up on a previous discussion, the health teachers are effectively an unfunded mandate. Is that a fair way
Correct.
to view that?
Yes.
I guess my view on unfunded mandates is always to push back.
Well, as I indicated in the email back, the issue with that overall is there's state standards in health that exist. As I indicated, some of the topics in the health curriculum, we are not required to have certified health teachers in the elementary teaching that curriculum. However, especially coming on from my perspective as a male, I would be very, very uncomfortable personally teaching some of those topics to a mixed group of students in a classroom.
Can I just follow up on that? I taught human physiology to teenagers.
Well,
I understand where you're coming from.
yeah. I taught social studies to teenagers too. So there's some uncomfortable topics in there. And I think in the litigious environment that we're under right now with some of those concerns, I would be very, very cautious. That would not be a recommendation I would have made. We actually had the health in place for a number of years. We got rid of it. We had classroom teachers attempting to teach it. Well, we found that during the course of a day for an elementary teacher, they sometimes got to it and sometimes they didn't get to it. And it is a mandate that it be taught. So the pushback with the state with mandates can be precarious. So we have to be very careful with that. I would be much more comfortable with a certified health teacher teaching some of those topics than for me to get up there and start talking about some of the lessons in puberty to a kindergartner or to an age appropriate level at certain points. So, we need to be very, very careful. So it's one of those things where we don't want to be penny wise and pound foolish at the same time. Now, some other districts choose not to do that. Some other districts have the classroom teachers to whatever extent do those curricular pieces, and whatever comfort level they get that. I can only tell you from my perspective from being part of the Suffolk County Superintendent's Association, the Long Island Superintendent's Association, the State Association, that everywhere that those certified health teachers are not in place, you can look at the news on a daily basis of hearing some of the questions that are coming up, especially when you have male teachers in classrooms with mixed populations. So that would not be something from an administrative level I would recommend reducing at this point in time.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to Michael, please.
How are you? I was just curious about, this is going back to some of the busing conversations we were having earlier. What the percentage of the district is that chooses to be bused. And I know the district has a policy that that everyone can be bused who wants to be. And if that is being fully utilized.
I would say it's probably about 80% of our kids ride buses. I could get a more precise number on that, but that's off the top of my head, roughly 80%. that's a guess. Like I said, I can get a more accurate number than that. As far as buses being utilized, there are times when you might look at one individual bus and say, look at that, there's only 14 kids on the bus. That does not mean we don't need that bus. It could be that bus for that school only has 14 kids. But that same bus, an earlier school or a later school might have 40 kids on it. And what really, the point at, the different, we could pay for a bus, we can have a 4-hour bus, a 5-hour bus, a 6-hour bus, a 7-hour bus, an 8-hour bus. Cost different amounts, but it's not that much more. It's not that much more for a 7-hour bus than it is a 5-hour bus. It's, do we need a bus or not need a bus? If we need a bus, whether it be for 4 hours or 6 hours, that's the thing. And what governs kind of the whole thing is what is the most number of buses that we need at any one time? And then that's what drives the whole, so it drives the buses.
No pun intended.
That there might be other times throughout that morning or afternoon where that bus might not even have a route. Not every single one of our buses does 4 routes. A lot do. Some will do maybe a longer, they'll do a Ward Melville route, and they're doing a longer Jolinas or Murphy route. They might not have time to drop those kids off and do a Minnesota or Nassau route. So they might be working on some of the longer Arrowhead, Setauket, or Mount routes. So some buses might only do 3, some do 4. So, which is why sometimes you'll see a bus, maybe not so many kids on it. Also, some of our buses, depending on what area of the district they're going to. We have areas of the district, for instance, that they might drive up to a bus stop and 25 kids get on the bus, drive to another bus stop a half mile away, and another 20 kids get on the bus and it goes to the school. There are other areas of our district where the bus might drive a half a mile on windy, hilly roads and pick up one student. Then drive another 3/4 of a mile, pick up another student. Then drive another mile and pick up one more student. And then it's got a 25-minute ride to get from all the way in the head of the harbor to Ward Melville High School. So that bus might only have 12 kids on it, but that first kid's been on the bus for 50 minutes at that point. So.
We have to be understanding that the district is 22 square miles.
Right.
So, with the
22.
22 and a half, he's being exact, square miles. So that's a lot of distance. So when you're talking about the high school alone, they're coming from all over the entire district. Now, it's funny because just as Jeff mentioned about 80%, we also, you would not know that so many kids are using the buses based upon the line of cars that go in front of some of the buildings on a daily basis. And some parents, because it's cold outside or it's raining, or if you haven't seen your kid in a few days and you're working long hours, you want to drive your kid to school and spend a few more minutes with them. We're seeing a little bit of that as well. It's not an entitlement issue. It's a family choice in many ways. But we offer universal transportation, and there's not a lot of sidewalks in Three Village. So sadly, at the beginning of the year, within the first week of school, we had one of our students hit over at Murphy trying to cross the street. We don't want a repeat of that. So we want to make sure that we're ensuring the safety. And if we went to some of the limitations that exist that we used to have, we had kids crossing Nichols Road to get to Murphy. And some folks in the community know the history. We had a couple of students over the course of time, students killed and some students paralyzed for life because of being hit there. So that the state does not allow us to say, oh, because it's a really busy road, you don't have to listen. If it's the mileage, it's the mileage, and that's all we can do.
Yeah, there is actually a provision in state education department in the student transportation laws for what's called a child safety zone, and it's a point system, and it could say, oh, well, based on certain conditions, that would, if a student has to walk through that area, it does qualify for transportation even within that limitation. However, Nichols Road does not qualify. So that kind of tells you, the level at what a road, a 4-lane highway with the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit does not qualify.
We'd like to go drop to Albany and take the person out of the transportation department and drive them down here and let them stand on Nichols Road and try to cross back and forth every day. And tell us that it's okay. So.
Yeah, there's actually even
Thank
been a
you.
little bit of proposed legislation about trying to change those zones to be at the discretion of the district, which seems like it would make sense, but not apparently in Albany. That doesn't make sense yet. I'm going to jump over just for a second to go to Sherry because she had something specific to transportation.
Jeff, I understood that even if a parent, quote unquote, wants to opt their child out of busing, that the New York State says you're not allowed. You have to still account for a seat for that student on a bus. Isn't that true?
Yeah, yes. You or me or any of us cannot sign away someone else's right to something, even if you're their parent. You can't say your child is entitled to a bus. You as a parent can't say, I waive that right. You can't do it. So that does not, but we have to be prepared to transport every student on one of our buses. That does not mean if we know there are, I'm going to make up a number, 300 kids who get driven to school every day, there has to be 300 vacant seats on those buses for those kids. We know that if on a given day, we know we'll do it based on who shows up. There are days though, and I will tell you, especially in the wintertime, there are times when it's like all of a sudden, it's like everybody decided to ride the bus that day. And we have to be ready for it. It does not necessarily mean we have half empty buses going around simply because we're assuming every child is going to ride the bus that day. There is some discretion in that where we can use some common sense in doing our routing. But however, you're correct in saying that we do need to be ready just in case everybody says, yeah, I want to ride the bus, or my kid wants to ride the bus.
So then in theory, we can't cut our transportation costs by that much because we have to somewhat be prepared for those kids to all be on the buses. That's why I'm asking this, because I know it would be nice knowing that we have so many empty seats on buses that, gee, we could just cut back some of the busing. But the reality is we really can't cut that much because we could have those students not take a bus for 3 weeks and then all of a sudden appear and you have to be able to put them on a bus.
Yes.
Right.
And even with declining enrollment doesn't necessarily mean we cut buses either, because it's not just how many kids can we pack onto a bus. Well, if we have fewer kids, we can use fewer buses. Logically, that makes sense. But the district is still 22 and a half square miles, and those buses still have to cover that same area. And if it goes to this stop and it picks up 10 kids where it used to pick up 14, it doesn't mean, well, now we don't need that bus. No, that bus still needs to cover that area. And in the same amount of time, right? Because we don't have, our start and end times are pretty condensed, from the time when we first start picking up kids toward Melville till our last kids get into school at the 3 late elementary schools. It's pretty condensed for the number of routes that they do. So that's why just declining enrollment doesn't necessarily translate into fewer buses either.
And another thing we need to be just cautious of too. So let's just talk about students who are homeless. So if they're in our district and their family becomes homeless and they move, let's say, to Huntington School District, and that's within 50 miles of the way the bus can drive, not by how the crow flies, it's by how a bus can go. That family, if they choose to be in Three Village, we have to transport them. And those numbers, as we've gone through the years, have become significant. We do have families that are homeless in Three Village. And some of those families, unfortunately, do not live within the boundaries of the district. They move out of the district and we have to transport them. That does become an increase. Now, I don't want this to be something from the community to say, well, it's all those homeless students that are causing our transportation increases. No, but it could be a situation where even if it's just one child and it falls within that 50-mile limit, we have to go get them and bring them back to to the district. So not an efficient way to do it. We sometimes may pair up with another district in transportation with those type of things. So that's when, going back to someone who asked, I think it was Carlos, if you asked about the municipal cooperation, so to speak, between other districts trying to work on things like that. That's something we would try to do as well. If they have someone that's coming in and they're, you know, let's say there's Smithtown School District, they have someone in Huntington too, that we may share a bus there, you know, just as an example. But we try to do that as often as possible. But if it's only one of our students and they're away and they're there, we have to transport them according to federal law. That's the McKinney-Vento Act. That's covered under.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Swap, for being patient and letting me jump past you for a sec. So it's all you now.
Oh, I just want to, ask a quick question about this as well. So even the parents cannot like opt out of the plan, like the bus. Is that true?
Correct. You cannot abrogate your child's rights as a
You
parent.
cannot.
If your child's entitled to a bus, you can't say as a parent, we don't want, my kid doesn't want, I don't want the bus. You can't do that.
Yeah.
That's the law.
I see.
Doesn't mean they have to ride the bus.
Doesn't mean they have to ride the bus, but
you can't just tell us disregard my child when doing the bus routing.
Yeah, because I see so many parents kind of just ride their children to give them own ride, you know, to the school. Hate
Sure.
to see that. It's a lot of like waste there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I would associate it with waste. You know, it's a parent's choice a lot of times. You know, if I was working a long job and I didn't get to see my child on a regular basis, I was getting home late from work at night, spending maybe 15, 20 minutes riding them across town in the car just to have a conversation and see how they're doing. That may be time well spent. And I have two children of my own. My daughter's 26 and my son's 15. You know, my son goes in early some days for practices for sports, and some days he goes in early for extra help. And, you know, there's a lot of quality time in there. I can't stand listening to his music, but that's a whole other story.
Yeah, that's another story, I know. But just, you know, when we're talking about the budget, you know, looking at how much, you know, we spend on the buses, you know, and it's increasing. And every year the contract and the money goes up. And then meanwhile, you see so many empty seats and buses, you know, you think, oh, there got to be something there, you know, we can do about it, you know, to improve the situation.
And as I said last night too, you know, the idea that by 2035, all those buses have to be electric. And by 2027, all the bus companies and all those districts that have their own fleets have to buy electric buses. Now, roughly an electric bus right now costs 4 times as much as a diesel powered bus or other gas powered bus. So that's a lot of money. And, you know, 2027 sounds like a long way away. In 2035, well, it's 2023 and we're talking about 2024, 25. So we're only talking like 2 or 3 years from now when this is going to affect us. And those costs, whether we have our own buses or whether they're coming from a company, are going to be passed along to the districts. So we're going to probably be seeing some exponential increases in those years as that's put into effect. So, and again, I don't want to be construed that I am against anything with green power and, you know, anything like that. But this is one of those things where a regulation has been made and this time frame has been into place, but the infrastructure is not able to catch up to that just yet.
Yeah, that is really tough. I can hardly imagine, you know, how we're gonna do the, you know, budget by that time, right?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. That's why we've actually, if Jeff tries to leave the district, we have a shock collar put on him. So if anybody tries to leave, it zaps him and I drag him back in.
There you go.
Okay.
All right, Ian.
On that, the scenario where a student moves out of the district for whatever reason, but is within that 50-mile range, does Three Village then receive any revenue from that other district where the student now lives?
No, and again, it's not moving out. It's they're homeless and they're displaced. So there's regulations about what that means. They have to be truly homeless. It can't be like, oh, we've decided to sell a house and move into another house that's, you know, on the water up in Huntington Bay. No, that's you. Now you go live in Huntington Bay. This is strictly by the families had no choice. Their economic circumstances, they lost their home and they had to move. Or if they're in Section 8 housing, whatever it might be, they have to move. We are required to transport them in that 50-mile. Again, how the bus goes, not by, you know, a straight line from here to there.
Right, road travel.
Yep.
And,
Got it.
and so that's, as Kevin mentioned, that's if they were a Three Village resident when they became homeless. Now they're in somewhere, living somewhere else, they have the option to either attend that school where they are now, in which case we don't have to do anything. But at their option, they can say, no, I want my kids to still continue going to Three Village. In which case, we have to go get them every morning, and
Right.
bring them back every afternoon.
Yep.
And we've had circumstances, we had on the South Shore, where in the family, there was an elementary, a middle school, junior high school, and a high school student. So it was multiple trips each day and trying to get them and all of us might say, well, can we just like pick them all up in the morning? And well,
Right,
not
you would
if they don't
think.
want to, not if they don't want it.
Yeah.
We can't say to the elementary students.
Brings us
"Sorry,
different
you have
start
to come
times."
with your older sibling, and sit around for 2 hours and wait for school to start. We can't do that.
Right.
And also that works similar. I touched a little bit last night on foster care. So if a student is living wherever they're living, in this case, let's say they live in Three Village and they enter foster care. If they get placed in a foster home in some other district somewhere, that district then bills us for the tuition. If it's regular education, again, state's term, they bill us the regular education rate. If it's special education, they bill us their special education rate. And we have to, in that case, we have to pay for that student all the way where they can bounce around district to district and foster home to foster home, foster home. We'll be paying for that student until one of two things happens. They graduate or / age out or become adopted. But as long as they're in foster care, we have to pay for them. Now it works the other way too. And we have students who are placed in foster care from somewhere else. They're here, that they entered foster care from another district. Now they're in foster care in Three Village. We educate them and we build those districts for them. That happens both ways. And before I forget, the question before about the heating oil and gas, right after we finished and we got on to the next question, something popped in my head that I neglected to mention. All our boilers are dual fuel, meaning they can burn either oil or gas, whichever is cheaper. Right now, gas is cheaper. So we get it's gas now that we get from National Grid. So there's really no place else to get that from, but should it turn out where at some time down the road, oil is cheaper, we can switch to oil.
Got it. Yeah. So that affords some flexibility. Yeah.
Dual fuel.
So one other quick thing on the topic of the electric buses potentially costing 4 times the price. I just want to say, hopefully the operational costs of those buses would be less than the current diesel. Whether or not it'll offset completely, time will tell, right? So
Yeah, we certainly hope.
not
so.
exactly apples to apples.
Right now, just based upon the 9 buses that our current company uses, the owner is in contact with us, on a daily basis. While they have 9 of those buses, 7 of those buses are not operational on a daily basis because the battery's not having a long enough charge. Because the bus route, as Jeff said, some of our buses arrive at the high school. They start picking up around 6 o'clock in the morning or 6:15 in the morning. And they may be going until 4 o'clock, 4:30 in the afternoon by the end of the day. So if a bus can last that long on a battery, we ought to invest in that company. So they might have solved Tesla's problem. So I'm waiting for Tesla to invent the buses now.
Hopefully there's significant improvements in the next 4 years, right?
Well, yeah. Maybe soon we'll have drones just picking up the kids and dropping them with parachutes at each of the schools. Who knows?
There you go. All right, Shara, you had another question?
Earlier, somebody mentioned that the capital improvement, that $1 million. And so my question is, even though once it's on the budget for the capital improvement, you can't use it for something else. And I'm not necessarily recommending this, but I'm asking, Jeff, could that money, that $1 million, actually be applied like to the reserves in the budget and not do the capital improvement now? where obviously it's putting more money back into the reserves. Like, I know people have questioned, can we put more money back into the reserves faster? So if people didn't want to do that improvement, which in my opinion might not be the smartest choice, but is it a possibility? Is it something that could be done?
No, now, if I were to say, hey, let's go out and say we're doing $1.4 million in capital projects, and then we levy the tax, right? So we get the money, and then we just forget about the project, and oh, look, the money wound up in reserves. Aside from me, putting my career, well, I could retire, and so I was gonna say, putting my career in jeopardy, I'll just retire. I mean, that's illegal. So we can't.
No, that's not what, that's not what I meant.
I'm not trying to be funny, but that's, and to say that, I mean, do districts do that sometimes? I'm sure they do. I don't know. I don't.
No, but that's not what I meant.
If we put capital project at zero, that lowers the budget, lowers the tax level. We don't still get that money without doing that project. And if we put the money in capital projects in the budget, and we say this is for capital projects, and we get the money, that money can only be used for those capital projects. And specifically those capital projects. And when we send out the budget newsletter in May, there's always a little blurb in there that says capital projects, and we're doing, and like in this case, for instance, it would say something to the effect of $1,425,000 capital projects to do cupola repair at Murphy Junior High School, bathroom refurbishments district-wide, asbestos abatement district-wide, ceiling and tile replacement district-wide, and playground equipment at Arrowhead. We can't do any project with that money that we didn't have in that little blurb. If we got the next year, like, let's say, the idea right now would be the bathrooms that we do would be at Jelena's, right? But if we say bathroom renovation or refurbishment at Jelena's, let's say sometime between when the budget passes and we get the approval back from the state education department, or even over the summer, it turns out Murphy, something happens with a couple of those bathrooms, and we say, you know what? Instead of doing Jelena's, we got to do Murphy's bathrooms now. We'll do Jelena's next time. We can't, because we said Jelena's bathrooms. So that's why we'll say in that budget newsletter, bathroom refurbishments district-wide. That way, just in case, we can use that money at any of our schools, and it would still be eligible for that building aid.
No, that's not what I meant. What I meant was, if the line item for capital projects, like you said, was zero instead of the 1.4 million, can
Right.
you someplace else on some other line items divvy up that 1.4 million, or can you just have it on a line item just for part of it to go towards the reserves, which the tax impact is the same on the homeowner, but the money is obviously earmarked someplace else?
No.
I don't know if I'm explaining it.
No, I think I got you. No, what would happen if that line goes to zero, it also lowers the tax levy by the same amount. It brings our cap actually down. So that's what it means to be outside the tax cap. We can put money into capital projects. Dollar for dollar, it increases the tax cap by that same amount that we added to capital projects. But it works the other way too. If we,
Got it.
our computer's about to shut off. Sorry, we gotta go. So, hurry.
Got it.
Okay. Maybe it was just that went off.
Yeah.
Oh. Hold on, if you can hear
You
us.
still
we'll-
have your
we'll back
audio,
on.
just no video.
Text Gary. Yeah, just to, I don't know if anyone can hear us, but,
We can, Jeff, we can hear you.
oh, good,
We
so I'll
just
keep
can't see
talking.
you.
Okay, we can't see, but I'll keep talking.
Yeah, please.
We're turning that back on. So what would happen if that capital projects line goes to zero? Then the tax cap goes down that same dollar amount. And we don't get that money. it lowers the tax levy and the tax cap. But then again, as I was saying last night, at some point, it's taking money away from building maintenance. Just my opinion, I think is a bad idea because we have, our buildings are old. Our newest building is over 50 years old. And I just think it's a very short-sighted mistake to make. Again, that's just my opinion.
But
Jeff, can I just
But I
say
think-
one thing?
I think
what
you misunderstood.
I think what Sherry is saying, if you don't use that money for that, and you leave the tax cap where it is, and you take that money and let's say you put it toward late start buses, she's asking, can you do that?
No.
Thank you, Vinny. That's what I meant. Yes.
Yes, okay, and I thought that's what I was answering. That's what I got, Sherry, but I thought that was what I was answering. If the capital project line goes to zero, that lowers the cap. So the cap then isn't 2.65%, it's something less, $1 million, let's say that line goes to zero. It's a $1,425,000 less. That's that much less we get in revenue. So we don't actually get that money if it's not in there for capital projects. You don't pay the money as taxpayers either. So there is a savings on the tax levy to do that. I don't want to, misrepresent anything. Yes, there is. I just, again, as I said, in my opinion, I think that's it's not a good road to go down to say, well, you know what, let's just not do the repairs on the buildings. Because
I'm not necessarily, to be fair, I'm not necessarily saying that that's a good choice, but I know there are some people who are thinking that if those capital projects are not necessary to do right now, let's take that money that could bring in as from the tax levy and apply it like to the reserves to get our reserves back up to where they should be, and then do those capital projects next year where we've given everything back to the reserves.
Right.
Yeah, I would love to do that. We can't. Before the tax cap, that's exactly the kind of thing we could have done. We could have said, well, let's put the money in capital projects. If we do the project, fine. If we don't do it, that's right. The money goes back into reserves. But part of the tax cap calculation is if now let's say let me give you another scenario. Let's say, nothing nefarious about it. We say, yeah, you know what? We're going to do that $1.4 million in capital projects. It goes in budget, capital projects. It's outside the cap. Budget passes. We levy the tax. We get the money for some reason. Oh, let's say it's one project, 1.4 million. We go out to bid, and the lowest bid comes in at $5 million, and we say, "Oh, forget it. That's ridiculous. We're not going to pay $5 million for that project that we were planning to spend First of all, we can't because we only have 1.4 million. So if we were to say, you know what, forget it, we're not doing it. What that means, that comes off of the following year's tax cap. We don't just keep that money and say, oh, hey, great, okay, we'll put it in reserves. It would lower the following year's cap by the same amount. We're having video issues here, so.
No problem. Sherry, if it helps you feel better, I had the exact same question and I was bombarding Jeff, and it took me about 4 tries till I got it. I guess the difference is I was thinking perhaps like you are like at home, right? If you were deciding to do improvements at home that you weren't going to fund, you weren't going to take out a loan for, the money was sitting in the savings account. You're talking about rather than sweeping that amount out of your savings account and putting it toward the home repair, you postpone this month and stick it into a CD instead. The money's not there. The difference is the money is not there. We would have to call that money in through the taxes first. And the only way we can do that is then to use it for the capital projects that we did.
Right.
Okay.
So
on that same,
one second, Sherry, one of the things in the chat I just see is, as Jeff just said, it can't be used for reserves. It can't be used for start time. It cannot be used for anything. Zero, nothing. It can't offset any start time costs. It can't offset anything else that we have that we would love to do. It just cannot be used for that.
Right, and again.
okay,
as I
so then there's
mentioned
another
last night-
question.
Well, hold on. As I mentioned last night, the reason for that is because when the tax cap law was put into effect, the state legislature and the governor did not want school districts to have to choose between taking care of the buildings and programs and services. They did not want them to have to choose. That's why the capital project money is outside the cap. That is the reason for it, because otherwise, what would happen is school districts would say, well, you know what? In order to get under the cap, we have to put capital projects down to zero. And then next thing you know, the school buildings all over New York State are gonna start falling apart in another 10 or 15 years because nobody's taking care of them. And it was specifically done in the tax cap law for that reason. And there's only a couple of things, we talked a little bit last night about, should other things be excluded from the cap? There's only a couple of things that are exclusions from the cap. And that's one of them. The increase to the retirement system, there is some, could be exclusion to the cap, but it's only to either of the retirement systems, employee or teachers' retirement systems. But only if the contribution rate, meaning the percentage of salaries that we pay into the retirement system, if that rate goes up by at least 2 percentage points, not 2% of what the cost is, 2 percentage points. So if it goes from, it was 8%, it goes up to 10%. Anything above the 2 percentage points is an exclusion from the cap. But that's big bucks. So if it goes up 2 percentage, or if either of those, if the teacher's retirement system, the contribution rate goes up by 2 whole percentage points, we're talking there's almost a couple of $1 million right there. And then it's only the amount above that would be an exclusion. So I guess there's only a couple of things that are excluded, and the retirement system one, that's only a kind of an exclusion, and it's a partial. Capital projects was specifically for that reason. That money can only be used for that. It's not for any other purpose. Or if we don't use it, if we don't put it in there, we don't get the money in the first place.
Okay, so on that same line with the capital projects,
Yeah.
when right now it's 1.4 million. If the cupolas and the bathrooms end up only costing $1 million, what happens to that other 0.4 million that was put into the budget? What happens to that money?
One of two things. Either it would offset, if we just say, oh, let's only spend $1 million and the other 425,000 we didn't need, it would lower the following year's tax cap. Or what we would do, like in a case like that, is say, well, let's do another pair of bathrooms then. If the bids came in, real low, because our plan right now would be to, let me back up a second. So the plan with the cupola, for instance, we're hoping it comes in at $100,000 or less. It's possible it might cost up to maybe $300,000 if it needs an entire replacement. So it would be great if it came in less than that. Then we can do more work. And that's another reason why we say, like, for instance, asbestos abatement district-wide, ceiling tile replacement district-wide. I don't have, like, if you were to say to me, well, what rooms do you want to abate the asbestos in? And my answer would be, I don't have any in particular. There's going to be a long time before we're entirely 100% asbestos free. That's going to take forever. And that's more of if we have money left over, if they're doing the other projects, and then we could spend it on that. We have the money, we'll get the building aid on it, or else the money doesn't just, anything left over.
Can be used towards another project.
No,
You just
another
can't-
project, yes, another project.
So
we
that
have
money
listed
can't
in
be
that
used. So that money can't be used for another project until the project that you earmarked it for has been taken care of. But
We can
once that project is completed, any funds that are left can be used for another capital project.
Yeah, well, kind of, yeah. So the way the blurb will stay in the budget newsletter is it's going to say, like, assuming this stays the way it is, it's going to say capital projects, 1,400,000. This budget contains capital projects in the amount of $1,425,000. Projects will include cupola replacement at Murphy Junior High School, bathroom renovations district-wide, ceiling replacement, tile replacement district-wide, asbestos, Arrowhead playground equipment. So we're not saying, well, this much is for that, this much is, so if we say, for instance, if we say, $300,000 for cupola replacement at Murphy and $900,000 for bathroom renovations at Jelena's, right? If we said it that way, plus a couple of other things to come up to 1.4 million. Let's say the cupola replacement only costs $100,000. That's great. But we can't then take the other 200,000 and do an additional bathroom because we specifically said, no, this much for this much for this. What we would do is make it more intentionally vague, and I don't mean that in a bad way, I mean that in a good way, vague. $1.4 million, these are the projects. That way, if the cupola replacement costs a little more, costs a little less, that's okay. We have the 1.4 million, and as long as it's any of those projects that we listed that we would use the money for, we'll get the building aid on it. We can't then say, hey, we got some money left over, let's renovate the auditorium at, whatever school. Well, we didn't list it in there. Now, we don't want to list all kinds of stuff either and give the wrong impression and say, oh, we're going to do all this work. And then somebody later say, I thought you were going to do this, and you were going to do that, and you were going to do this, and you were going to do that. No, we decided not to. So we want it to be accurate, but we want to give ourselves some room. And we're talking about, we're going at probably the earliest for the Murphy cupola replacement. We'd be going out to bid probably a year from now, maybe, probably around a year from now. So we don't know what the prices are going to be then. So we want to leave ourselves some room in there where we'd be able to use all that money and again, be able to get the building aid on it. So, but we have to, it can only be used for projects that we have listed in that budget newsletter.
Okay, great. We're going to go to David and Christine.
Thank you.
To keep everybody apprised, it's about 4:40, just as we're thinking through the next piece, your chapter 2 of coming together with your report. Okay, David.
I'd just like to ask about the plus and minuses about BOCES versus in-house training. You could reasonably argue that it's always good to get some external training because that brings new ideas and fresh ideas into the system. Also, it's a bit similar to the bus contract argument that it also gives you quite a bit more flexibility when funds are short, you can cut back. It's not necessarily essential. I suspect also that maybe if we were using BOCES, we would use less of those services. Can we get a breakout on the price savings that we're getting doing it in-house, especially professional development?
So the short answer to that is yes. And over the course of years, having run the department that Dr. Mascari runs, we did do the price out of these, and that's why we chose to go the route we have gone over the course of years. Also, the issue is for us, whenever you're dealing with an outside company, a vendor, or BOCES, which sometimes BOCES will actually be the one to contract the vendor and then send them to us. But then BOCES charges an administrative fee, sometimes as high as 17% on whatever that cost is. So while we might get money back from BOCES over a course of time, we're also paying an administrative fee to BOCES for that particular service. It's also a matter of when we scheduling that person when we want them to come in versus when they're available to come in. And some of the programs that we're using are throughout the country and sometimes internationally. So trying to get vendors in for different programs may be difficult. So we could certainly price it out and see the difference in those type of things as well.
I mean, just as a general principle, I'm not a big fan of consultants, but it is good to have fresh ideas flowing through the system on a regular basis.
Right. What we have done though over the course of time is we've often sent some of our teachers in pairs with an administrator and get trained in a program with a vendor, let's say in another state, and then have them come back and turnkey train our staff. They become the local experts on that. And there have been occasions where we've done that, where we've brought in, we've had that type of training, and we've allowed other districts to come to us and be trained, and we charge those districts. We've done that as well over the course of my experience in my former role. So I can speak of one time when we did that with social studies, for instance, when the social studies standards changed to the new Regents exams. So yes, yeah, absolutely. Bringing some fresh ideas in is wonderful from some of those vendors as well. And it's also good for our folks to get out there and see some of those things as well and bring it back to us too.
My thing here is because we're so hard up against not having enough money, anything that adds flexibility to the budgeting. I mean, for example, next year, the state may, look, I don't know about you, but I have very little trust in the state's financial situation. So we could very quickly see a big decline in state input here, right? And I think that this is why I and Sherry and a few others are asking about the reserves as well, is this concern about the state. But this is one area where you can give yourself some price flexibility or expenditure flexibility that seems to have at least neutral effects in other respects.
Absolutely agree with you.
Okay, Christine?
There I am. Okay. I actually was just going to comment on the buses when I put my hand up there. I'm not the buses, sorry, the capital projects, to just point out that we do get a lot of that money back, correct, in financial aid for the capital projects money?
Yes, we get our building aid ratio is 66%, and that varies from district to district. And it's, it goes back to 1966 when Three Village School District first came into existence. That was the aid ratio then. It was a much more rural, less affluent area at the time. And what's happened over the years is every year as the district has gotten more affluent, each year the state ed department recalculates building aid ratio. And with the theory behind state aid is the wealthier the district, the less aid, and vice versa. So the wealthier the district becomes, the lower the aid ratio would be. However, there's a piece in there where each year we get the higher of whatever what they call the current aid ratio, meaning based on the current demographics, or what we got last year, whichever is higher. So that's why over the years it stayed at the 66%, because even though the district has gotten wealthier, if you look at, especially compared to, like, for instance, Nassau County districts, which go back even, decades before us, they were, more affluent is the right way to say it. They were less rural, even back in the 1950s and 60s than Suffolk County. So you see some districts that are nowhere near the wealth level of a Three Village out in Nassau County that might be getting 30 or 35% building aid, and we're getting 66. So it works to our benefit, and without going into a whole nother.
But one of the few times it works to our benefit. That's one of
It actually worked for our benefit. And really,
Exactly.
up until 2010, it's a different story, but up until 2010, we were actually getting 82.5%. Because there was a piece that we were getting, it was called reorganization incentive aid, which goes back to 1966. That was a piece that every other year, the state legislature had to vote to extend or not just for us, any district that got it. And in 2010, that ended. So
as far as that issue in the budget, the capital projects one, you're putting it in the budget this year. We wouldn't even see those improvements for a few years based on the bids you have to go through and the approvals you have to go to, correct?
Well, I would say.
And that's usually how it goes, right?
Well, by next summer, I would say.
Next summer. Okay. So if we wait a year to do that, then
yeah.
it would be 2 years before those things could be repaired. So the chances are that they might even be in worse condition than they are now. So, and in addition to that, we do get that most of that money, more than 50% of that money back eventually. So when we're looking at the budget and places where we're looking to tighten up, I'm guessing I'm getting from this whole conversation that's not a place that would necessarily make a huge difference. And in the long run, it isn't costing us that much, correct?
Correct. And certainly that's my opinion. Yes.
Okay. And the other thing about the buses and the discussions we've had with the buses, because I've been in a lot of meetings about buses, and I only went to one of those start time meetings, and a lot of these things came up about the buses as well. we have to have a seat for every kid. So that's not a place we can move in either, right? On any of that stuff. That is not, those are not things we can look to cut because there's no way of doing that, correct?
We would not be able to cut busing now. No.
Right. So the money we're putting into the busing and all those busing price concerns is another thing that is a thing that is out of our control.
And,
Right.
and just to understand, Kathy Casella, who is our transportation coordinator for the district, works with Jeff's office, and we try to tighten up those buses every year anyway, regardless of whether, as our enrollment's going down, as we have kids, we try to tighten it up as much as possible.
Yeah, in fact, from 4 years ago, we were using 50 buses. Now we're down to 47. So each year Kathy does the routes and says, sometimes she says, you know what? I can cut a bus. Great. And then we do, if we can, we do. So.
Okay. Thank you.
And one more thing about the building aid piece, that 66%. Building aid is one of the components of state aid. So if somebody says, well, where does the building aid go? Well, it's part of state aid. So when we say our state aid next year is $49 million, well, 11.5 million of that is building aid. If we didn't have the bond payments, we didn't do capital projects, we wouldn't get that $11.5 million. So that's where one of the components of state aid is kind of like the umbrella term for a bunch of different categories of aid. And one of the biggest one, well, foundation aid is the biggest one, but next to that, the next biggest one for us is building aid. There are districts, if you will look at the state ed department on the state aid, and you look up district by district, you will see some districts similar size as us might get $1, $2, $3 million in building aid. We get 11.5 million, not because we're so special. It's because we put the money into our buildings. We're paying somewhere around, well, what's the number in the bond payments? 12.3 million plus the 1.4 million in capital, and we're getting $11.5 million in building aid that offsets that.
Okay.
Jeff, can you also give a clarification answer in the chat, please?
Will the leftover funds go to capital revenue, capital go to revenue?
Yeah, no, if there's leftover money in capital that we didn't spend, let's say $1,425,000, and we say we're only going to spend $500,000 of that. The other $925,000 actually would be used to lower the cap in a subsequent year. And as Christine mentioned, there are times when some capital projects take us years to do. The generator project at the high school right now, for instance, that's been in the works for years because, and in this case, it's because of all the shutdowns and manufacturing plants and stuff because of COVID. The unit itself has been delayed year after year. We're ready. Soon as the generator shows up, we're ready to install it. But that's a project that was in our budget a few years ago to do the generator at the high school. It's still hanging out there. We're waiting for the generator itself to be delivered. So it can take a few years. So when we say, if we don't spend all the money out of that capital projects, there's no like deadline. It's not like, well, we need to spend it by June 30th of next year. No, there is no one exact deadline. If we get to the point where we say, you know what, there's $900,000 from that year's capital that we're just simply not going to spend, what we're supposed to do with that is then use it to lower the tax cap in a subsequent year. Because this coming up, assuming this budget goes forward and is approved by the voters as is, we got that money in the first place because it increased the cap the year we got it. So if we don't need it down the road, it should lower the cap at some point down the road when we decide we don't need it for any of those projects we said it was going to be for.
Okay, at this point, I don't see any more questions. Last chance if anybody wants to raise a hand. Okay. So I think at this point, what's going to happen is Jeff and Kevin are going to leave us. we are going to kill the live YouTube feed. So this will become, oops,